The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. On today's show, I've got Michael Patterson, who hails from the US. Michael has got lots of different hats in the cannabis industry, so I'm not going to try and explain them all here. Let's just say he's a cannabis expert, but he can explain all the various projects that he's working on. Welcome, Michael. How are you doing?
Anuj, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Real pleasure to have you on. So this is actually the first recording I'm doing since Corona lockdown, and we'll talk about that in relation to the cannabis industry. But how are you getting on a personal level since things got all a bit crazy?
Well, me personally, my daughter, she's 20 years old. She's going to university. She was studying in Germany. She just got back 7-8 days ago. So I'm so happy because there's still a lot of people stranded all over the world. So I'm definitely glad she got back. As you and I were talking offline, I pretty much work all the time. So I really don't have a social life. So my life really hadn't changed that much, except I just got to keep my distance at the grocery store. But as we were talking about differences between Europe and America, if you're not in a major metropolitan city in America, most people don't use public transportation, which is kind of a good thing right now, but we're a little bit slower on the uptick of science over here for some reason lately. So we're going to have a lot more cases than a lot of other countries. We're going to go through a lot of pain, but what I'm already starting to look at is what is the U.S. as well as specifically cannabis hemp going to look like after this? And that's what we'll definitely get in touch with.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll talk more about that, a bit later in the show, but I'm glad your daughter's back in home and stuff, and that must be a big relief for you. Cool. So look, as is usual, why don't we start with a bit about you, your background, how you got involved, and why you got involved in cannabis?
That's a great question. So I will be, how old am I? I'm going to be 49 on Tuesday, March 31st. So
happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. At this point, I don't know if it really matters anymore, but that's fine. Lifelong healthcare executive, an occupational therapist, nursing home administrator by training. I ended up running a nursing home chain in excess of $230 million here in the States, in multiple states. If you're not familiar, the nursing home industry is one of the most litigious and regulated in America. So I grew up on heavy regulation. I got used to having audits, used to having impromptu visits. And this is something, as if you're in the cannabis space, you should be either getting used to or have somebody on your team used to. So for me, transitioning to cannabis was actually easier than the healthcare side. So for me, my transition was easy. But I tell everybody, the straw that broke the camel's back was working with a veteran, a World War II veteran, 95 years old, named Saul. Saul was a World War II vet. He used to flow bombing raids over Italy to protect the world from tyranny. And he ended up having a lot of back pain due to those flights. And so he'd been on opiates for 30 years. And he went to the Army hospital called the VA, and they said you had to get off opiates. And he was going through withdrawal. He was asking about, could he take medical cannabis? This is in 2014, and it wasn't legal back then. So long story short, Saul passed away about 6 months later. And I remember saying to myself, I said, you know what? Somebody who has all this knowledge about systems and how systems work, especially very complicated systems, I said, somebody really needs to help all these people who are going through cannabis. And so I realized that nobody's going to stick their neck out, specifically at that time in history of the U.S., where they're going to risk their entire professional career over that. So it was one of those moments that you kind of have with yourself to say, you know what, unless you do something now, then you're just going to kind of either miss this window and you're going to not be able to help people. And so you need to stop worrying about being fearful and move forward. So I guess my main thing was when I was more scared of doing nothing than failing, that's when I was ready to move forward. And so starting in 2014, I founded U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development. So I tell people we are becoming the general contractor of the entire global industry. So to give you an example, currently we have 5 medical cannabis licenses in Africa in 5 different countries, as well as 1 through a joint venture in Portugal. So we are licensed to import and export EU GMP compliant material, whether it be THC, CBD, THC raw crude, finished product, anywhere it to another country that has an import license and it's legal. So we see the future in that aspect as we have 5,000 acres under contract to do outdoor cultivation of THC. And we hire local farmers in Africa to be able to do this. It's all organic land. There's no pesticides and herbicides because they can't afford them. So it's all organic. So we convert that into raw crude as well as finished product and ship it over the world because we see the long-term picture of cannabis being more of a commodity. And so we have to work on getting that price down in order for more people to benefit. So that's one of our large projects we have going on right now. We also are the corporate compliance directors for a group called Restore Integrative Wellness. They own 6 dispensaries outside of Philadelphia. We also work very closely with another company called Integrated Compliance Solutions. They are the software that banks use in the US and Canada to take marijuana money. So think of them as banking compliance software. They also now control through acquisition. They bought a company called Greenlight Payments. They have the most merchant processing accounts for cannabis and hemp in the United States. So what we do is we partner with other groups, or either they hire us, we partner, we do JVs to be able to expand the services across the plane of cannabis. So another company we're working with is called Parcel, which is PARSL. They're a blockchain seed to sale software that's based out of Australia, and they have a tagging system for all products. So imagine you go into your dispensary and it has a tag on it. You get it home, you just run your app over it, and then all the information can come up about that product. They could immediately tell you if there's a recall on that product. Also, they could even put in marketing videos into that tag to be able to say, hey, thank you for enjoying our product, and this is the way to use it safely, and so forth and so on. So we feel that more information specifically as a marketing tool, as a tracking tool. So one of another reasons we back all these companies and work with them is because as we grow through our own operations through Africa and the US and otherwise, we need these systems and we need these technologies to be successful. So that's what we've worked on with them. Another project we're working on is through a cryptocurrency called Paytrax. Paytrax is based out of Oklahoma, and it's in the final stages of getting a United States SEC or Securities and Exchange Commission letter, which is called a no action letter. And if you get that letter in the US, it means they've certified that your cryptocurrency is 100% legal. There's only 2 other companies in the United States history that have ever done that. So we've been working on this for 8 years, where our goal is banking is a big problem here in the States. And so if we can have a cryptocurrency that people can use on their phone to purchase cannabis, especially to cultivators, to processors, dispensaries, and the end user, then our goal is we can decrease crime, because the problem is, specifically in the state of Oklahoma, there's too much cash. So if we can eliminate a problem, then we can be successful and help with public safety, but we also make a little bit of money. And so that's what we look to. We look to those, what I call choke points in the system, and we consult and work with those types of companies. And then a big chunk of our business too is doing a lot of analysis and consulting for Fortune 500 companies and global companies looking to get into the space, because we have our arms in everything. So we can kind of see the future and see where it's coming, which is really exciting. And it gives you the ability to kind of get a leg up on what potential competitors could be doing.
Wow, that's very broad and very global as well, which is great, because that's what we're going to talk about in a second. But actually, I want to pick up on a couple of things that you said there. I guess the main one is, which African countries are you operating in, and how difficult or easy was the whole licensing process to get up and running?
Well, that's an easy question, because I didn't have to do any of it. So we were approached after licensure was already received in Tanzania, Uganda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Zimbabwe. And then we facilitated a license through partnership in Lesotho. So what we do is we cultivate in the East African countries, and then we ship it into Lesotho to be able to be processed. And we have an import-export EU GMP compliant license there in Lesotho that we can ship out of. So the licensure process, if you know what you're doing there, because I reviewed all of them once they're all approved, but the team that we had there, it's interesting because they have been dealing with the governments there for 30 years on large agricultural projects. So think large fish farms, eel farms, potentially tobacco investment of hundreds of thousands of acres. They work with the UN, the WHO. So these these people already knew how to do those types of things. What they didn't know is the specifics of cannabis, the specifics of the market. And that's why we ended up JVing with us, because since we do have a global reach and we understand markets and we understand how to get our product out of Africa, because that's the number one thing right now is Africa is a great place to do business in some ways. In some ways it's difficult because we all know it has a reputation for not being as forthright as maybe other countries. So we have to work to bring that trust in to say, no, they're doing it right. This is everything that's set up correctly, and work to that universal standard, which is becoming EU GMP, or good manufacturing practices. So that's where you and I discussed about having team members to be able to come in and solve a problem, because I wouldn't know the first thing about starting to do an application in Africa, but our partners on the ground in Africa know all that. They just need to know the technical details from cannabis and what they need to put on those applications. And then after that, how do they do the operations? Like, how do you go through the CO2 extraction, the ethanol extraction? Who do you go to get the right type of materials, the staffing, the knowledge? And that's what we bring. So we're physically bringing people in once Corona is over on the ground in Africa to stay for months at a time, from the US, Canada, Europe, to where we can make this an international place to where we can do high volume, because we want to be able to offer low cost crude and low cost finished product to large providers so we can get this to the masses. Because I think that's what we start to see is as pharmaceutical companies get involved, they're going to know, okay, well, this is great, but I don't have time to grow 100,000 acres on my own. Just send me your raw THC or cannabinoid product, and then we'll use our scientists in our labs and we'll make the final product. So what we see is this API, or active pharmaceutical ingredient, is coming on very slow, but it's starting to move a little bit quicker to where it's becoming a part of the industry.
Yeah, and maybe it's a good point to kind of elaborate, actually, because the term API gets bandied around quite a lot. Would you mind just explaining what exactly it is and why it's so important?
Well, active pharmaceutical ingredients. So if I'm making oxycodone, okay, and I need opium or whatever derivative they make of morphine or opiates. So most of that is grown in, I think it's Tasmania, the little island off the coast of Australia. So they have a lot of those farms. And so what they do is convert that into API, or active pharmaceutical ingredient, and shipped to a pharmaceutical company that has a Schedule 1, Class 1 narcotics license. Every country does it a little bit differently. So once you have that license, you're allowed to make the final end product. And so cannabis, since it's a Schedule 1 in the United States and Class 1 in other countries, if you're an API manufacturer that you're already manufacturing these types of drugs, then you can bring that cannabis drug in under your current licensure. And then a lot of times what we're finding is they'll bring it in and maybe do research for a while, figure out what they want to do with it. And because the major manufacturers or pharmaceutical companies, I call it, they're kicking the tires right now. They're just kind of looking around, seeing how does this work and how are we going to make money on it? Because we know something's there, but we just don't know exactly how. But typically that's how the API system works that I'm aware of. As you go globally, more and more companies are going to get into it. The number one thing I find is companies are so nervous just to deliver a product. So imagine if you receive 100 liters of 60% THC product and you don't have the right paperwork. So there's this big concern that, okay, it's like, so for example, the way I see it going on in my head is you send a product to customs and the customs officer is like, oh yeah, I heard this is legal now, but can we accept it? Like, yeah, it's legal, but you know, well, who says so? They call their supervisor and call the other supervisor because it's never been done. But once we get past that initial hump, you're going to start to see this pick up more speed at the end of 2020, and moving into 2021, you're going to start to see more of a bigger interest with pharmaceutical companies trying to get more involved.
Yeah, thank you for that. Good explanation there. Cool. Okay, well, that's a good background on you. Maybe we can talk a bit about the global cannabis trade. So there's lots of different things going on. The US, obviously a huge market, but obviously fragmented because of the state by state rules. Canada, huge public companies, obviously had a terrible 2019. 2020 is just not working out for anyone at the moment, but and then Europe kind of feels like it's at the beginning, but then you've got South America, you've got Israel, you've got Australia doing interesting things. How can you tie that all up in a nice sort of overview for us?
Simple. Where you are, the EU is where to be, because everybody wants to be there. Why? So let me tell you why. So currently medical cannabis. So let's take medical cannabis statistics. So if you're new to the industry, you don't know much about it. Typically, take the population of a country or take the population of a state, and 2 to 5% of that population will qualify for medical cannabis. These are averages that we're starting to see in the U.S., but they're pretty solid because we've now seen them now for about 7 years, all the way back to Colorado. So let's do that. So if I've got 700 million people in Europe, let's do the math. We've only got 335 million people in the US. So over time, we're going to have tens of millions of people who qualify for medical cannabis in Europe. And you all do more socialized medicine there, so the government is paying. So right now, you look at a country like Germany. Germany's the leader in Europe. Everybody wants to be in Germany. Germany is the place. Everybody wants to be. So Canada wants to be there. And so Germany came out and said, okay, if you're going to sell here, you got to have EU GMP certification for your stuff. And everybody's like, well, that's going to take forever. Right. So this is where we are. So what's going on is there's only a certain amount of providers that have that status. So the big guys, Aurora, Tilray, all those guys, Afria, they have that capability. They have are starting to sell into Germany. Also, Germany has released new licenses there, but those licenses won't be up and running till late 2020, early 2021. So that leads this huge void or vacuum in the market, because currently there's about 70,000 patients in Germany and all their medical cannabis is imported. Well, that's going to be hard to do. So the global market wants to get into the EU because they know there's going to be this huge rush. The rest of the countries, including Canada, and Canada doesn't like me saying this, the rest of the countries want to supply that product. Because anywhere in Latin America or Africa, there's no domestic market whatsoever, zero. So where does that product go? It either goes to Canada, who only has 37 million people, or it goes to Europe right now. Now, let's take Australia. Australia, they're doing good. They got about 35, 40,000 patients. They keep going up slowly. They have manufacturers there who are providing it, but the manufacturers know in order to get real dollars, they got to get to Europe because there's only like 30 million people in all of Australia. So if there's 30 million people and that's smaller than the state of California. So that's where everybody wants to figure out, how can we supply Europe? How do we get into that game? So we're currently talking to importers and exporters in Australia and Colombia. We're starting to talk to ones, and we have ones in Canada. But what I find is Canada, no offense, they just feel like they know it all right now because they're the bigwigs. So we're like, okay, that's fine. When you need something, you tell us, because it's funny because since we are US based, they're like, oh, well, we know a little bit more. And I'm like, that's cool. If you know it all. But what we see happening is those big guys, they're hurting right now because they had to do everything in news. They had to do it. They had to grow it. They had to process. And then they didn't know what they were doing. No offense, because nobody ever done it. So what do? If you take Canopy and Aurora, they went all over the world getting licensure. They got 27 licenses all over the world. Well, you know how many they're actually getting money out of? 2. So they got 25 of them that haven't gone live yet for multiple reasons. One, the biggest reason is you can't expect to go into a new country with a whole new industry and just go seamless and be like, oh, okay, this is exactly like pharmacy. Here you go. It just doesn't work like that. You got to jump through all these hoops. And so those licenses that they bought in these different countries will pay off, but it's going to take another 2 years. Well, Wall Street doesn't like that. And that's why you see these prices going down, is because their costs are staying high and their profits or revenues haven't come up. So when you start to see the end of 2020, when you see the big boys, when they're getting really close to revenue and expenses, you're going to start to see all these stocks move up, because the biggest thing in news is the demand has not decreased. It has only increased behind the scenes. So to an average investor, they're like, oh, the market's terrible. I'm like, well, no, this is like the best time ever to buy, because I physically see how these companies are going to become Amazon one day. And if they get through this time, they're going to be very well set up, because in the future, it's all going to be about distribution around the world. So they have this distribution market to where companies like us and other companies can supply them with product at a very cheap rate over time. And then they can sit there and sell all over the world and do all that, what I call heavy lifting of going into governments and getting patents and doing this and doing that. But if they have the ability to have enough supply, that's where I see that the global market's going. Also, medical is the future for the next 5 years in Europe. Recreational, people talk about it, but the government's 65-year-old mothers and fathers don't get behind recreational. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
all right. So eventually recreational will come. But if you're looking to get into recreational cannabis in Europe or Canada's fine, but in Europe, it's just a waste of time. Start with medical, and then that's definitely the way to go.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a really good overview. I guess the key differences, as you just highlighted, is the recreational versus medical. And in the US, in certain states, that's alive as well as in Canada. But for the rest of the world, it's medical, right?
Well, and also, let me give you a perfect example. So you ever heard of the company called MedMen? MEDMEN. Well, if you haven't heard, if you're listening, MedMen, they're a publicly traded company in Canada, but all of their operations are in the United States. Well, they had a former CEO, Adam Bierman, and I got nothing against the guy, but their model coming out of the gates was, we're a recreational company. We're rec. We're going to revolutionize rec. We're going to make cannabis like Apple. And they looked at Apple, the company, said, hey, we're going to make stores like Apple. We're going to do all this. Well, the problem was, what they didn't see at the time was 65 and 70-year-olds don't care about rec. They don't want to know anything about rec. And so they went in trying to just get massive sales, and they didn't train their staff. None of the staff were trained in cannabis medicine, and they didn't talk about cannabis medicine. It was more like an alcohol sale. Oh, here you go. This will get you high. This won't get you high, whatever. And so their stock went during the cannabis crash, I call it last fall. Their stock went down 99%.
Ouch.
And so Andrew Bierman got laid off or let go, however you want to call it, I think in early January of 2020. But they're, to me, a perfect example of a company who came out of the gates totally recreational and really tried to promote that. And it was just too early. It just didn't resonate with people. And so the companies that go medical, like Tilray's publicly traded in Canada, they're doing things right. They actually have a chief scientific officer. They're doing research studies around the world. They are going to be more of a pharma-based company. And to me, for a global market, that's what you really want to see, because that is what's going to win out in the long run.
Yeah, and that's probably a useful distinction, isn't it? If you're looking at domestic, and when I say domestic, US market, maybe a pure rec focus is a good idea. But if you're looking globally, then medical first, I think, is probably
right. And also think about this. If I'm a European investor, just start looking at America, start understanding the America. I tell everybody, follow my LinkedIn page, which we'll give out later. I update everybody on everything, because once America says go, you need to understand, when you start getting calls from Florida or Ohio or Kentucky and they want to deal with business with you, you need to understand what you're dealing with when they do call, because this is what we're starting to see in hemp. Hemp, people, hemp is 100% legal here now. Well, now I got these suppliers from Europe saying, hey, well, can you help us get some supply in America? I'm like, yeah. And they don't know who to call. They don't know if a company's reputable or not. I know that. So we've been able to export hemp CBD isolate into South Africa, because South Africa just legalized CBD isolate in December 2019. Well, the way we were able to do that so quickly is we were already dealing with Africa. So we all knew each other. And so I depended on them. They find the buyers, I find the sellers, and then we can work this international trade, and we all trust each other, because as you can trust your partners, and as you can trust the information and you understand that information specifically in both markets, then as these markets start to open up through legalization, you're ahead of your competition, and you'll know what to invest in before they do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just to add on the hemp point, when you talk about it from a CBD point of view, that makes sense. Do you also cover hemp as an industrial material?
Mm-hmm. So we part of a group called United Hemp Alliance, which is actually based in the UK. And so they run a store called UnitedHempStore.com, which is mainly wholesale and a little bit of retail sales for GMP approved products, lab tested products, quality products. But the United Hemp Alliance is all about connecting distributors and people to the industrial products, the building products, hempcrete, hemp oils for gasoline, oil, building materials, paper, plastics. So what we're finding is we need to be able to connect all these companies, because a lot of companies want to get into it, but they don't know where to start. And then we have a lot of people who may want to grow hemp for fiber, which is grown differently than CBD. Then you want to connect the farmers to the people who want it and the processing plants. Because what we see in the US, it's a chicken or the egg syndrome right now, meaning everybody here last year wanted to grow hemp for CBD. So what do? Because we're America, we got to run out and be the entrepreneurs, right? So in 2018, we grew 80,000 acres of hemp in the US. In 2019, we grew 500,000 acres. Okay. To put that in perspective, that's more than the entire world outside of China grows. So out of that 500,000 acres, only 250,000 acres made it to processing plants. Why? Because you had all these people running out of gates, not knowing what the hell they were doing. And they were going into farming who'd never been farmers. Then they were buying seed from irreputable seed dealers that their product was coming in hot, meaning it was over 0.3% THC. So it had to be destroyed. And then others, they didn't think about things like having a dryer to dry your product, and it rotted. So all these different problems. So I guess what I'm saying is if we follow CBD explicitly. And so what we see is now farmers are looking for this season and say, okay, I'm going to start just going all into fiber. But the problem is they need a processing plant that can process that fiber into those materials. So every time I talk to a CBD processing facility or a lab, I always tell them, look, if you're going to start with CBD, you need to go ahead and plan on doing the processing for fiber and concrete and things like that, because CBD will pay your bills right now, but in the long run, it probably won't. So you're going to need to diversify so you can bring in hemp and you can make whatever you need and send it off to whoever needs to get it, whether it be a CBD manufacturer, whether it be a guy making drywall in a place, whether it's Adidas making shoes or a big designer brand making T-shirts, so you really need to think about that. And so what I see in Europe is kind of the same thing. Everybody's trying to get in under CBD to cultivate, but they really need to start looking at the long term, which to me is fiber and industrial uses. I saw a great show, a video on YouTube of what do they have it when they have the houses that are made by 3D printers? There's a machine that it literally printed out a 3D house, and it was made from regular concrete. What we see is, imagine making those houses that are going to cost $10,000 out of hempcrete, and they're 800 square feet, and they can be made in 2 days, ready to go.
Yeah.
So those are the types of things that we see, but I think we're a little bit early for that market, and we need a little bit of R&D to figure it out. Because here in the States, if you're building a house, it has to last for 20 to 30 years. Well, if you're using a new material and you haven't studied it that long, how do you know it's going to last? But the good thing is it's all natural, and that's one of the benefits. And we're starting to see people do spec homes, like one home where they'll just do it all hemp. And so it's starting to go, but it's just still early.
Yeah, I think particularly now with so many concerns around sustainability and environment, hemp has to be part of that solution. And it's like, for me, it's a bit of a PR problem, if anything. Not enough people know about it. So hopefully that can continue.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, because a lot of times I talk and people don't know they don't know the difference between cannabis and hemp. And I try to talk to a lot of people who have nothing to do with cannabis and hemp. So, for example, I spoke at this in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, near Miami. It was an IT expo. It was massive. So they had the first year they ever talked about cannabis and the blockchain. So we had a booth in the trade show. So I'm sitting there, and Anuj, I got to tell you, like 20 people came by our booth and say, "Why are you here?"
I was about to ask you.
And I said, you know why? They go, no. I said, because this is legal in 42 countries. And they go, really? I said, yeah. And if we don't come and talk to you and let you figure this out, this is an industry, and you need to get off your ass and get into it and start helping us. They all go, wow, I never knew that. This is so exciting. So I got all these calls after. So to me, I look at that as this is a total untapped market. So if I could come in here and build that trust, I can start working with companies over the next couple of years to develop some revolutionary stuff in tech that I can never even think about, as long as I can educate them into the process. So my job is to come in and talk to people who know nothing about the industry and say, start listening to me. I'm going to give you, this is what we're dealing with right now. And now you can take all your experience that you have in all your different backgrounds, and you can start to connect the dots that I can't even see. And by doing that, we can work together and move this forward, because the future is all about partnerships. you can't be a Canopy and a Aurora. I call it a silo. You can't be a silo in this business moving forward because the industry, for multiple reasons. One, you're going to lose. It's too much of a risk financially. So we both know that. And then two, you can't move as fast because then you're always trying to search for somebody. But if I have a tech group and they're in Australia and I say, hey, I need this and this and this, I need you to get it done. He go, great. I'll have it when you wake up in the morning. I'm like, this is awesome. So we're working 24 hours a day. And I know if it's a tech issue, then I don't have to deal with it and I can move it on to them because they understand what we're trying to work towards. And they're going to look after us to make sure they get it done well. Same thing as if I'm looking for an extractor. If I'm looking for an extractor we want to partner with, which we have multiple, I want to make sure, okay, I need a product that's going to be in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to need it to where it's easily trainable and it doesn't break down and we can get multiple. So if it does break down, we can get those parts because it may take a month or two, specifically now with COVID-19, to get replacement parts. So I have to set the stage for them so they can say, okay, I need to use my expertise to make sure that we do this right. So everybody depends on everybody else. But if we do it right, we can move faster and make more money.
Yeah, partnerships are the way forward.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned COVID, the dreaded C word. How do you see it affecting cannabis industry in the near term is very obvious because people can't leave their houses freely, but maybe, 6 to 12 months, what do you see the effects being from this lockdown?
I can tell you right now, one of the number one effects for all of us listening around the world is cannabis in the United States has been deemed an essential service in almost every state. So let me tell you how crazy this is. So the state of Illinois just made recreational cannabis, not even medical, recreational cannabis legal in January 1st, 2020. And it was just announced last week in news that it's considered an essential service. So all those stores can stay open. So in 3 months, we went from just a rec thing to now it's an essential service. And every state that medical cannabis is legal in the state so far has been deemed an essential service. That right. is, and a lot of times I tell people what COVID-19 is going to do for us, it's going to legitimize cannabis as a medicine. That's the number one thing, because if we legitimize cannabis as a medicine, then the laws start to fall because society's catching up. And so a lot of investors, a lot of people don't understand or don't factor in the psychological and the sociological impact of cannabis in that evolution that has to happen in everybody's brain. So now in the US, 93% of all Americans want medical cannabis legal and 65% want recreational cannabis legal. So now it's not a political issue anymore. It's a societal issue. And in the United States, we look at it as a freedom issue. It's our freedom to be able to do this. And so once we push through that boundary, what I see happening is the whole world's going to respond. So the way I see COVID-19, the number one way of impacting us is pushing cannabis as a medicine forward and allowing us to get on the psychological side to push this forward faster. And we're having our elections in November over here. And if we can elect a Democratic president and get a Democratic Senate, then we will start to see major changes in our laws, which is going to affect everybody. So hopefully one day we'll be able to start exporting and importing THC product. But another major factor that I see with COVID is a lot of states, specifically over here, who did not allow home delivery are now allowing home delivery or side curb service because they have to be due to COVID-19. Because the old thought process was, we don't want to deliver it. Our kids are going to get addicted to it. The world's going to end, all that stuff. Well, now they're shifting to say, okay, what's a medicine? So we'll let it be delivered and we'll let it be picked up at the side service. So what we see is, like, I'll be totally honest. This week, I got a call from a lieutenant governor of one of the states asking me and another attorney about what is the ramifications if we change this law in emergency session. So I'm sitting there. I'm like, this is going to affect like 14 million people if we make this decision and we don't do it right. So we recommended whatever you change at this point, you have to be able to change backwards. So he was talking about, well, what if we just allow people to grow it on themselves at home? I said, okay, but if you do that, you'll never be able to get it back, ever. Because how are you going to track it? How are you going to rein it in? If you allow home delivery, you can rein that in because you're licensing it through the certain licensees. So we're seeing a lot of thought process on how can I get the medicine to the people better. And I think that's going to help us more because by doing that, we destigmatize it as a drug and now it's a medicine. And the third way I see it happening is in value chains and supply chains. What I'm seeing is there's more flour being sold here. And there's more edibles because you don't need vape pens. You don't need batteries from China. You don't need all those types of things. So now people are going a little bit more natural. If I can just have an edible and I can eat it, then I don't need any utensils. I don't need a flame. And if I want to do shatter or flower, then I probably have a bong or I probably have something at home or a dab ring or what have you that I can do that. All I need is a lighter or match. So we don't have to go to the stores much. So I've noticed, I see buying patterns changing a little bit. There has been some talk about increase in sales, but I think the increase in sales is because everybody's going on lockdown. So now I think over the next couple of weeks, you'll see a decrease in sales. I did hear the illegal markets over by you in the UK are spiking for prices because everybody's locked up.
Toilet roll, bleach, and cannabis. That's where everyone's stockpiling.
Over here too. Over here.
Cool. That's it's really useful summary there. So yeah, but I mean, offline, you mentioned this sort of phrase that you've personally coined, your Patterson pillars of the cannabis industry. Do you want to elaborate a bit on those?
Sure. So a lot of times I try to say, how can I help somebody who doesn't know much about this industry really make sense of it from an investment standpoint or just a regulatory standpoint or business standpoint? So I came up with 3 pillars of the industry, which I call the Patterson pillars. So the pillars are public safety, patient access, and commerce. So these 3 areas must balance in order for a system to become successful or remain successful. So let me give you examples of that. So public safety are the rules and the laws. How many places can this be sold? How many qualifying diagnoses are you going to allow for doctors if it's medical? Can you pick it up in a pharmacy? How easy is it for doctors to prescribe or recommend this medication? And then public safety that's public safety. Commerce is how many stores are allowed. Can stores make money? Are there too many stores? Are there too little stores? And then the last one is patient or consumer access. If it's a medical product, how hard is it to get a doctor's recommendation? Can doctors advertise that they write recommendations? Do you have to drive 200 miles to find one doctor who will write this and they're going to charge you $700? And then so those 3 areas must balance. And so a way I kind of describe this is kind of like a Goldilocks zone. So you want to get that right balance. So let me give you examples of both. So a system that doesn't work is the state of Oklahoma. So the way Oklahoma was set up, it was a constitutional amendment. So the way it works in most states in the states is that if the people get together and want something, if they write it on a ballot, they can, and they get over 50 or 60% of the vote, depending on the state, it becomes a law. So in Oklahoma, they wrote it to where there was no limit on the number of stores. There was no limit on who could apply, except you had to be an Oklahoma resident. And then there's 0 qualifying conditions for doctors. So where we are, this is July 2018. So now they have 10,000 licensed marijuana businesses. There's 0 physician qualifying diagnosis. So I can go to the doctor and say, I got a torn hangnail or my hair is out of place. Give me a prescription and they can give it to you. Okay. So what that's done is public safety has become very bad because now you've got all these people. The only thing you had to do, Anu, to get a license is you had to pay $3,500 and pass a background check to get a medical marijuana cultivation or processing or dispensing license. That was it. So we're having robberies now, these stores. We're having cultivation stores get robbed or jacked. And then the pricing is starting to plummet to where if the pricing plummets, then the stores can't make money. Well, if the stores can't make money, then we're back to the black market because they're selling illegally. So that system has to change over time because it's too much commerce. There's too much patient access. And so now public safety suffers. So let me give you an example.
So it's like a free-for-all, basically.
It's a free-for-all. It's too much. So it's not the Goldilocks zone. So if you take those pillars and you put into New York State, when they started, it was way too much public safety because they only allowed for 5 licensed businesses to have licenses in the state, and they were vertically integrated, which means they had to grow it, they had to process it, and they had to sell it in stores, but they were only allowed 4 stores per license. So that means 5 licenses, 4 stores per license, 20 stores for 20 million people. So then there's no commerce because I can't find enough stores. And then the patient access, the doctors were not allowed to advertise that they did marijuana recommendations. So then if the patients can't find the doctors, and then once the patient gets the recommendation, they go to the store and it's $800 for medication, then nobody's buying the medication. So that system doesn't work because public safety is way too strict. The patient access is severely limited, and the stores go under because they can't make any money. So,
and it all ends up going back to the black market.
Right. So that's where we come in, and we go into states and try to help them ahead of time, saying, look, you can't regulate this to nothing, because if you set this up to fail, you're going to do everybody a disservice, including yourself. So one of the states that's done it really well is a state called which is Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania, they have 25 grower processors. Okay. Around the state, there's about 14 million people in Pennsylvania. So they have 25 grower processors. They can grow as much cannabis as they need. And they have 150 stores, which is good access. So you can sit around and you can go to different grower processors if you're a dispensary to get a better deal. There's about 15 to 16 qualifying diagnoses for physicians. To go to a doctor in the States, in Pennsylvania, costs about $200 to get a recommendation. I think you only have to go about once every 6 months. And then the medication is relatively priced well. It's about $200 to $300 a month right now, and that'll come down over time. So that's pretty good access. They're able to open it up enough. They have over 200 or 250,000 patients in Pennsylvania right now, and they're going up really, really quickly. But one last point to add to that, to the 3 pillars, the state that is the largest seller outside of California is Florida. Florida has 22 licensed businesses here, and there's over 330,000 patients, and we're going up 3,000 to 5,000 patients every single week. So we'll become the largest in Florida because we have 22 million people here. So we'll probably have over 1 million medical marijuana patients by into next year, 2021.
Wow. Yeah, and it's a really good way to set out the balance that's needed here, and also really useful to show when you have no rules or a very poorly thought out regulatory system, the pitfalls of that. You know, too many people being able to sell, crime, etc., happening because of it. And, you know, people usually think it's over-regulation that sort of strangles it, but it can be the other way.
To be under-regulated. Well. And so an example over by you, Ireland. Let's take Ireland real quick. So Ireland.
Or the UK.
Let's take the UK. Hard. Okay, let's take the UK. So, we passed it in the UK. Yay, we passed it. And what do you have, like 40 people who actually have medication now? Yeah, I mean.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can't. It doesn't work because the pillars don't balance. So that's what I'm saying. So the public safety is way too strict. There's no commerce because you can't have a store yet. And then the patient access is limited because doctors are so scared about writing it. They're worried about going to prison.
Completely. It's an ongoing kind of issue because it was November 2018. So, 18 months ago, and the situation hasn't really improved massively in that whole period of time. And with COVID going on, they're not going to get a chance to look at it until a while later. But it's really useful lessons what's going on in the States, I think. Well,
the biggest thing, if you're exactly what you just said, I don't know what's going to take time and everything. But if you're an investor or you're somebody wanting to get in this business, it's going to happen. So we all know it. Yeah. So let's just keep working towards it, because if you get in now, then in another 3 to 4 years, you're going to be sitting on this podcast with the news telling everybody that you're the man or you're the woman because you got involved, because you heard this guy ranting and running his mouth in the States saying you need to get involved.
Yeah. I mean, look, just the last bit on that, there was a survey done, and it was a good quality, robust survey that revealed it's estimated around 1.4 million people in the UK use cannabis at the moment for medical purposes. Now, obviously, they're accessing that from the black market, but it shows that there is a huge need and demand for it, and it's very specifically medical, not recreational. But
it's interesting. And let me add another statistic to that. So, in the state of Michigan, they did a study. They said 40% of people using cannabis for recreational purposes are actually using it for a medical condition. And the number 1 condition is sleep, and the number 2 condition is anxiety or PTSD. Yeah. So you're right. Yeah. You're dead on.
Well, Michael, look, there's loads more we could talk about. I'm very conscious of time, so I think we're going to move to the end. But I think maybe we should actually do another show because there's so much we could talk about.
I'll talk about whatever you want. Anything cannabis, I'll talk all day.
Great. Well, look, I mean, my traditional final question is, what did your parents say when you told them that you were getting into cannabis as a profession?
That's a good question. So my parents I got to tell you that I grew up in North Carolina, if you can tell from my accent, and my parents grew up in a very conservative home, but they're both liberals. They both have, they're not like shout from the rooftops. They're just, quiet, they have master's degrees. So they knew what I've done forever. And so my mother was very supportive. Oh, this is great. This is wonderful. So to give you an idea, my parents are 77 now. So this was over 7 years ago. So my father never said anything. Okay. He was like, okay, well, that's nice. And so about 3 years into it, I sent him a podcast just like this. And it was in Pennsylvania. And I said, hey, this is what I just did. So I knew he was for it when he sent it back, critiquing my entire interview and saying that you should have said this and this and this. And then, was it 2 years ago or a year ago, he goes totally from one side to the other side to where he said, he emailed me that his friend, who is a retired ophthalmologist, has MS, and can I get him some cannabis in an email? Well, the problem with that is he's in an illegal state. So my dad went from following every rule in the book, being in the military years ago, to sending me a potential drug deal online that he wanted me to get. So I had to call him. I said, Dad, you can't put that in writing. He goes, oh, okay. I said, go to his house, see what he needs, and I'll see what I can do. I can't guarantee anything, but that's kind of the evolution. And so now my dad cuts out articles, even though we do have an internet. He cuts out articles of the paper and he mails it to me about hemp and cannabis now. And so he's all excited because I keep preaching to him and everybody else over 65. This is your medicine. This is what's going to help you more than anybody else. So you need to get off your ideological train and start looking at the data. And so my job is to be that first voice or that door, that front door, to say, how do I start, even for people wanting to use? Perfect example. My father-in-law, for Christmas this year, I told him what to get for CBD. He wanted CBD. He was just too scared to buy it. So I had to buy it for him. And now he uses it and he loves it. So it's just that mental shift at that age. But that's what my parents said. So now they're excited. They think it's interesting. So I'm going to send them your podcast. They'll totally analyze the whole thing. They'll get a kick out of it. It'll be good.
Great. Well, cool. Michael, thank you so much. And look, it's some crazy times we're living through, but I'm really glad that you was so open and actually really positive about the road ahead for us in this particular industry. Yeah.
And do me a favor, please follow me on LinkedIn. Just do Michael Patterson, U.S. Cannabis Pharmaceutical Research and Development. I'd love to interact with you, help educate as much as possible, and show you where the opportunities are in these industries moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be providing loads of links on when we're promoting the show. Cool. Great. Well, thank you, Michael, and take care.
Thanks, Anuj.
Cheers, mate.